Hello, I'm Matt Kelly.
And I'm Matt Dancona.
And this is the two Matts for the week ending Friday the 15th of December. What shall we call this episode? What did we talk about, Matt?
We talked about the Rwanda fiasco. We also talked about Nigel Farage being back from the jungle and calling out Kevin Ligo from ITV for a fight.
Yeah, because Kevin Ligo called him a wanker.
Yes, and this is both very amusing, but also has some significance, I think.
Shall we lay out our cards on the table and let Nigel know where we stand on that issue? What about calling it Farage You Wanker?
I think that would be honest and true.
I don't know whether our producer's going to allow that, but yeah. Oh no, we can stick an asterisk in. People could think it was Winker.
Yes, and we're quite happy with that.
Yeah, okay.
Farage the Winker.
All right, okay, so this is the two Matts, episode 26, Farage the Wanker.
Or Farage You Winker.
No, that's better. Farage You Wanker. You wink. Enjoy. So, Matt, another quiet week in UK politics.
Just dead quiet.
Anything you can think of we should talk about?
Well, I suppose, again, the continuing collapse of the British government.
Yeah.
Part 25,000.
It's incredible, eh?
It is, and I think it would be wrong not to begin with Rishi Sunak in his Spectator interview with Katie Balls,
yes.
Very good political editor of The Spectator, saying, "I am not tetchy." It was the most sort of unproductive response to a question.
There was another weird little moment of viciousness that came out when Keir Starmer tackled him about homelessness at PMQs this week.
Yeah, it was
and the response, it was weird because you very rarely see him sort of lose it to that degree. Yeah. You often see him bristly and kind of like, why am I even deigning to answer all this shit? But he really snarled at Starmer. Like a dog, really snarling. And it was like, again, my hypothesis that he is having a slow car crash.
He is not well.
Meltdown. Rishi, are you okay?
Yeah, are you okay? I mean, it's a bit like Holly on Holly Willoughby on This Morning, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are you okay? We should go around and take him some soup.
I'm actually pretty far from okay.
Pretty far from okay. No one asks me anymore. Anyway, so I think they hoped that his Number 10 gang hoped that the failure of the rebels to, walk the walk would deliver a kind of surge in Sunak's authority.
I can't believe that Marc Francois didn't follow through with his five family stuff.
It's incredible. Well, should we start with a clip? Because just to illustrate the bedlam, there's a very funny exchange on Good Morning Britain the morning after the vote with James Cleverly, the ill-named Home Secretary, responding to a question from Ed Balls. I don't know if producer Matt can play us that.
If there was a coup in Rwanda 2 days after it became law, what would happen?
If the treaty that we signed with Rwanda, in the same way that if there are treaties signed with other countries, if the treaty on which the bill, so the bill supports the treaty addresses the reasons that Supreme Court said that they felt Rwanda at this point in time. And this, they were talking about details from 18 months ago. The treaty addresses the specific points of the Supreme Court. The bill refers to the treaty. If the treaty is being upheld, then for the purposes of asylum processing, Rwanda is treated as safe.
I've got to say, I didn't understand a word of that.
In the same way,
I don't know what you're talking about. Could you say that again? Because it was really, really unclear. Nobody will know what you just said.
I mean, asylum is the word, but not in the way he means. It's funny because Ed Balls asked a very good question, which is Parliament has just passed this, or is passing this bill, which says Rwanda is safe, and all decision makers have to acknowledge it's safe. And as Ed Bull says, if there was a coup
Yeah.
What would happen, and cleverly just dissolves into word salad explosion.
Yeah. But I love this idea that we can now just declare things in bills and they become an act of Parliament.
Yeah.
And it's a fact now. So what's next? Like the government competency bill,
yes.
where the government is declared to be remotely competent.
Yes. I mean, actually, the great thing, and this is where one hopes that checks and balances will operate, is that I don't think that the Supreme Court will strike down this bill if it becomes law, as some Tories fear. But I do think that judges both in the UK and in Strasbourg will have regard to the UK Supreme Court, the original judgment that ruled that Rwanda was not safe, as well as Parliament's declaration that it is.
Yeah. And just to take a serious point as well, because it's all too easy to laugh at this clownery, but
it is,
it's, at the same time, it's all too very serious for so many people.
It's incredibly serious.
What's going to happen if, let's say if, because when is far too strong, but if they finally fly out a plane load of asylum seekers to Rwanda, and then something bad happens to one of them in Rwanda because of the state of Rwanda, do we then just say, no, that didn't happen? Didn't happen because it couldn't have happened because we passed an act of law to say so? No,
I mean, I think that the assumption which is baked into the bill and indeed their whole strategy, that once these people are in Rwanda, if it ever gets to that, which I suspect it won't, that the spotlight will be off them, is so politically inept, as well as ethically ridiculous. I mean, what was interesting about the vote was that I watched the whole debate for my sins, and it was the 4th anniversary of the 2019 election victory, and you thought, my God, how quickly politics moves now, because you've gone from an 80-seat majority, and I remember that night thinking, this is it, we've got 10 years of Boris Johnson.
That's right.
To Rishi Sunak, who was not even Chancellor at that point, in the sort of dying days of his premiership, one assumes and hopes, desperately trying to save this pointless policy. The weird thing is, Sunak, although he has a working majority of about 56, I think, he sort of presides over a hung parliament, in that, as has been said often this week, there are these 5 families, the European Research Group, New Conservatives, Conservative Growth Group, Common Sense Group and Northern Research Group, not to speak of the One Nation Group, which survives in a sort of bedraggled form. And so they had multiple meetings, the right had multiple meetings with Sunak, and it wasn't clear whether or not they were going to vote for or against or abstain. But in the end, he got it through. Only 29 actually abstained, and not a single Conservative MP voted against the bill.
Yeah.
I actually personally found the most depressing thing about the day was watching the One Nation Group capitulating to this bill. To watch Damien Green arguing that, well, it may not be to the taste of the One Nation tendency.
Just explain the One Nation Group.
The One Nation Group, I suppose, is what you'd call the centre. What used to be called the Tory wets, the more compassionate Conservatives, the more internationalist Conservatives, the Conservatives who worry more about rule of law, anti-populist, probably Remainer, most of them, and so on. So to see that group going, okay, on a promise that the bill might be amendable later on, all that was going on in the background. So I did watch the whole thing, and it was surprisingly flat, the debate. You'd think this was a big crunch moment, but actually what one had was a sense that the real action was going on elsewhere, and Maria Eagle, the Labour MP, really put a finger on it when she said that she observed a squeamishness in a lot of the Tories who were standing up and defending the indefensible, with this line about let's not let the best be the enemy of the good. Well, actually, when you're talking about the lives of people who've come a long way in very desperate circumstances and have made their way over on a small boat, actually you do need it to be the best.
I think I can't get over is the cost so far.
It
came out, and also the sort of duplicity around the cost, because there was no. I don't know how it eventually came out. Everyone was talking about 190 million, and then suddenly another 100 million got slapped onto the bill.
It was 400 million.
Now it's 400 million by the end of the week. Now they're talking about some who was it that was asked directly, how many will you be able to get off UK soil? And they said, well, in the first year, hundreds, and then maybe thousands, in subsequent years. But 400 million quid, you could go over to Calais, write them all a cheque for 250 grand and say, go.
It's more like a direct debit than a cheque at the
madness.
moment. It is madness. And I think it's that there's a fable in all this, which is that Sunak obviously saw the success of Take Back Control in the referendum and get Brexit done in the 2019 election, and wanted his own 3-word equivalent, and lit upon Stop the Boats, which makes no sense at all in the middle of a cost of living crisis. We're coming up to Christmas. It's going to be really hard for a huge number of voters, and so to watch this spectacle, or just be aware of it in the background, must be completely baffling to most voters, I would think. It's baffling to me.
I wonder whether, we're guilty of it now, is the distraction tactic. The fact that Channel 4 News put out, they've got a fact-check team, and they put out a couple of minutes. We can maybe put the link in the show notes, but there was a couple of minutes work around the state of the NHS since the Tories came into power. And it is unbelievably bleak. The absolute collapse of the waiting lists for cancer, for A&E, the amount of patients being seen. It's just utterly, inconceivably bad. But of course, all we're talking about is bloody Rwanda, and no one's nailing them to the mast about when are you going to fix the NHS. That's what people care about, surely.
That's true. And I think that, Labour's strategy is to assume a degree of emotional intelligence on the part of the voters, which is, it's enough to see the Tories getting into ever decreasing circles on an irrelevant issue. I think what does worry me, though, and sort of very speaks really to a kind of new European, the issues you write about every week, is that there's a very infantile idea of sovereignty that has resurfaced in this row, and it's that somehow, this is about sovereignty, and, we should be able to do what the hell we like with refugees. And this is dangerous and bigoted, but it's also completely infantile, because the whole international, but to any nation, it now pools a lot of its sovereignty. We need to be taken seriously as a responsible participant in all sorts of international agreements just to operate.
That's right.
The ECHR is one of the bedrocks of the Good Friday Agreement. It's also one of the bedrocks of the EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement. We need to be trusted if there are going to be war crime prosecutions at the Hague over Ukraine. People who are critical of what Israel is doing in Gaza rely upon international agreements for that. The United Nations. If Trump comes into office again in November next year, NATO is going to be at risk. And we in Britain will want to defend NATO. But if we're doing it as a country that withdraws from international agreements impulsively, our voice will carry little to no weight.
We'll just be seen as a
joke nation.
Outlier.
A joke nation. Now, I don't think that we are going to withdraw from the ECHR, but the fact is that the direction of travel of the Conservative Party now is 100% in that direction.
But even the sort of the irony of the reality of the situation, which was that much of the debate was spent around this tortuous argument about why we can't just cast aside international law because Rwanda won't let us.
Yes.
So, if you're talking about the idea of purity of sovereignty, that's never going to be the case in any bilateral relationship, even where you've got a bilateral relationship with a third party, and a third party being Rwanda, who are the ones saying you can't just be that cavalier about international law or we won't play ball.
Rwanda saying, basically, the UK being held to account by Rwanda because Rwanda is concerned about reputational damage if the Conservative Party has its way.
What has happened.
And I think that there's a kind of magical thinking at work here, actually, which is, it is reprehensible to a degree, and but also it shows that many Tories have become properly delusional and have seen Brexit not as an end, but as a beginning of the kind of detachment of the UK from everything. And this is... It should not need to be said, but it does. This is a recipe for not only irrelevance but national poverty.
Yeah.
And not being taken seriously at all on the global stage in a era, in a century where collaboration is going to be more important than ever.
Yeah. Totally.
So it just doesn't make sense. And I think the other thing to say about that day is that there was an awful grim shadow looming over it, which was the suicide on the Bibi Stockholm, the barge which was is still housing, I think, 500 refugees. Yeah. And it's always important not to speculate on the proximate causes of a suicide. We don't know. But I think, what one can say is that refugee campaign groups have raised concerns for years now about the lack of access to good mental health care that asylum seekers waiting to be processed have. And one remembers that there was a Legionella strain on that barge, and they still marched them on.
And certainly the reports from people who are on that barge say that
would suggest
morale is at absolute rock
yes,
bottom.
and he told stories of the poor person involved waking up screaming in the middle of the night.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the reality is that there'll be plenty of people out there. I hope not too many of them listen to this podcast, because I hope they're more discerning, but there'll be plenty of people out there who'll say, well, good, it's meant to be a deterrent, isn't it? That's the whole point, is that it's not meant to be nice. Okay, it's a bit unfortunate somebody's actually gone to that extreme, but if the whole place was like a holiday park, then they'd come in their droves.
Yes.
So that's what the Tory government has done. It's created little monsters out of all of us, really.
Well, I mean, the problem with populism and the Conservative Party is at the moment, undoubtedly, and without question, probably will remain for a while a populist party, is it's brutalising.
Yeah.
I think my own view is that we need a complete reset on border management policy in this country, which is not going to be easy because it involves politicians being prepared to stand up and actually talk about the merits of immigration as well as the problems of border management itself. And I thought, the best speech that was given in the debate was by Liam Byrne, who's a former Labour immigration minister.
Yeah.
And he just said the only way in which we can get that system to work and to work effectively is to fund it. And that's a very unpopular thing to say, even in the Labour Party at the moment, where they're desperately trying to keep, tight control of the fiscal strings. But he's right. Yeah. He's absolutely right that in the 21st century, border management, there's going to be much more population mobility, not least because of climate emergency. And grown-up democratic countries are going to have to approach this whole suite of issues in a way that combines compassion with relative speed of processing, and it's going to be quite expensive. But what did you expect?
Yeah, no, totally. And of course, again, to return to this theory of the dead cat, we're all talking about Bibi Stockholm, we're talking about flights to Rwanda, we're not talking about the 120,000 people that haven't been processed.
That's right.
That's the problem. That's the main problem.
And even if the thing went through in early January, let's say there will be lots of problems, but let's say it went through reasonably speedily in January, and let's say the flights did, Suella Braverman's dream was realised and the flights did start taking off. The number, as you said, Matt, the numbers of refugees who are going to be deported, even if the bill does become law, is in the hundreds.
Yeah.
So it's a rounding error. It is pure performative politics.
Yeah, vindictive.
It is the person we've quoted quite often on the podcast, Adam Serwer, the American writer. The cruelty is the point.
It's almost like you try and go back and think what kind of psychology would come to this as a solution, and it seems to be a solution originating from a psychology of absolute bitterness and hatred, and not bitterness and hatred of them, but of the situation that the politicians have found themselves in. They are so resentful of the fact that they haven't been able to competently deal with this. They're lashing out. It's like it's the vindictive nature of this single policy and the extent to which they're prepared to pursue it, both in terms of finance and reputation, both to themselves and to this country, is beyond any rationale or logic.
Oh, there's no rationality to it at all. I mean, it has its origins in the Boris Johnson era, when he was starting to falter. And do you remember there was Operation Save Big Dog?
Big Dog, yeah.
Right? And this was one of the sort of ideas that was just tossed onto the table. Let's send them all to Rwanda.
Yeah. Priti Patel, wasn't it?
Priti Patel.
Yeah.
And it has hardened into a sort of virility test for Rishi Sunak.
That's right.
And a kind of test of his authority in the party, but also of his determination to protect and continue the 2019 coalition with the Red Wall. And I think part of this is a very London-based, elite-based misunderstanding of what animates the group of voters that are, frankly, a bit too lazily described as Red Wall voters. You know, the idea that everyone in a Red Wall seat sits glued to their television saying that, well, I might not be able to afford my weekly shop, but thank goodness someone's stopping the boat. It's not how people operate in the real world.
No.
But I mean, I think that's how Sunak thinks, which is, to your point about the dead cat, which is, my economic policy's working a bit, but not really.
Well, because we're about possibly going into recession.
Exactly. And I better do something that those voters will like.
Yeah.
And all for what it's worth, all the surveys of Red Wall seats show that people are not impressed.
Yeah.
That people are not stupid. They understand that there are different forms of immigration. They understand that this is just a gimmick.
Yeah.
But the whole fixation, the Tory fixation with the Red Wall is in itself based on a very classist idea that people in Red Wall seats are sort of bovine and stupid and respond to being thrown scraps of red meat. It's not like that at all,
And I think we do need to, as you alluded to a minute ago, we need to start talking about actual solutions and alternatives. It's very easy, all too easy to slag these guys off, and quite rightly so. But there is a problem, and we do need solutions, and we should get that brilliant woman, Zoe Gardner,
excellent,
who's fantastic on this, and has been on, I've seen her on Newsnight, and I follow her on Twitter. So Zoe Gardner,
if you're listening,
be reaching out to you somehow and hoping you'll join us on the Two Mats podcast
because
in the near future.
It does need a solution, but that solution is not just performatively punitive measures. It's far from that. It's very complicated.
Do you think anybody, is there a constituency of people who hasn't seen this for what it is, who are going,
this may be a triumph of hope over experience, to quote the late Robert Jenrick, but he's still alive, is he? Okay, sorry, thank you for but I do think one potential merit, and I wouldn't put it any further than that out of this whole debacle, is it might open people's eyes to the fact that simple solutions to complex problems don't work, and to not trust people who come to them with a sort of South Sea bubble promise, policy-wise. Leaders who come and say this is going to be difficult. Actually, you think of the past, the Churchills, the Kennedys. People who challenge voters tend to do well.
Yes.
And we live in an era where politicians too often treat voters as a kind of static group to be frightened of.
I'd build on that very slightly by saying people who challenge voters, but in combination with an ambition that voters can get behind.
Yes.
Which is what's totally missing right now. There's no ambition.
Well, I mean, leadership used to mean taking the electorate with you
to somewhere that they wanted to go. That's the point.
I think bigotry is part of the human psyche. Anyone can activate bigotry. I mean, that's not challenging, and it's not the case that there are certain parts of the country that are bigoted and certain parts that aren't. It doesn't work like that. This is a battle within people often. And statesmanship consists in not stirring that particular pot, but in saying, actually, this is a very nuanced business. We understand your concerns, but here's why it has to work in this way. There's a debate to be had around integration. There's a debate to be had around which sectors require a particularly liberal immigration policy at the moment. But this kind of blanket idea that we need to get legal migration down and we need to get illegal migration down. And an interesting consequence of Robert Jenrick resigning as Minister for Migration is that they've split the job into illegal migration, which is Michael Tomlinson, and legal migration, which is Tom Pursglove. And I think that tells you a lot about the kind of desperate significance they're attaching to this. That in itself will not, that sort of portfolio redesign is not the answer to the problem.
As we've said before on this podcast, the idea that Britain needs a kind of moonshot ambition as a nation, I think is very, very important right now.
Yeah.
And the point I'd make about that is when Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon before the end of the decade, he didn't say how or why or what the spaceship was going to be called or how we were going to do it. He didn't know the technicalities. He just said that's where we're going, and we're going to be big enough and brave enough to go there. Not because it's easy, because it's hard. That's why we're doing it. And for a politician to say, as Keir Starmer is saying, I think, we will get an answer. We don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but there's our ambition to have a fair immigration system, to have an economy that's growing, to have an NHS that works, to have infrastructure that is functional, that the roads aren't absolutely falling to pieces, and that the schools are good and fit for purpose. That's where we're going as a nation. Get behind me, That's good, I think. And it doesn't seem like a big thing to have to say.
No, I think the big ask of a prospective Labour government, and it was where I think the Remain campaign failed dismally, was to make the positive case for immigration. There are almost no politicians now, really, mainstream politicians, who do that.
Yeah.
Labour's response to all this is, it doesn't work. We'd spend the money differently. That's right. We'd categorise.
They're arguing over whether the toilet on the spaceship works. We can't go to the moon. The toilet doesn't work.
But I understand this side of the election. There's that whole argument about caution. But I would hope that quite early in a Starmer government, if it happens, that one of his speeches is, look, we need a total reset. This is a new era. Brexit did not answer your concerns, Britain, over this. Clearly, the Rwanda policy is a bust. We've got to actually start talking honestly about why immigration is important to this country, and has been for at least 70 years.
But I think the answer to that is to start at the end. Is to say,
yes, what do you want?
Here's a picture of Britain in 10 or 20 years' time, and this is what it looks like. This is what our economy is founded on. This is why it's important that we have this kind of education system to fulfill this kind of economy, why we'll need skills from abroad to fulfill this kind of economy, what that kind of economy will be able to do for us in terms of transforming our health service, our infrastructure, our education, all of the things to raise everybody up, right? The true levelling up. There's the picture of the future. Work backwards from there. What do we need? And the biggest answer is we need the right people with the right skills, whether you can grow them from home or you bring them in from abroad. Now, if you make that case like that and you paint a compelling picture of the future, the only real opposition somebody could have to that, if it's grounded in logic and it's thought through and well communicated, the only real opposition would be that bigotry. And that doesn't count in my book. They can go an F off. So,
yes, and I think that bigotry in the abstract is different from. It all depends on how the question is phrased.
Yeah.
If you say, how do you feel about this percentage of the country's population being from people who are immigrants from this year or whatever, then a proportion of people who are nervous about change will, because immigration is a proxy for change, will say, I don't know about that. But if you say, do you want the care system in 20 years to be functional? Clearly the number of vacancies in the NHS is unsustainable.
Would you like 3 times as many nurses in the NHS?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right?
Yes, of course.
The answer is
where
yes.
Do you think they're coming from?
Right. Look at almost every sector that is in trouble at the moment.
Yeah.
And immigration is part of the answer.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you find in focus groups and so on is that people who have incredibly congenial relations with their neighbours who might be, they might have different heritage, Afro-Caribbean heritage, or Eastern European heritage. We're fine about them.
Yeah.
We just don't want.
Yeah.
That's why the breaking point poster that Farage
was such a crime.
Was so evil, because what it did was it othered people and who desperately need to come to this country in some cases, and who are in other cases extremely needed this country. And said they're a menace. Yeah. They're a threat. And what's more, because this is always the populist trick. Who can we blame? If we're not blaming the judges or the lefty lawyers or the liberal elite, they're blaming immigrants.
Yeah.
The idea that the problems of this country are all to be laid at the door of immigration is simply factually wrong, let alone ethically bankrupt. It's just absolute nonsense. It's just... Right.
Well, okay, so I think you know where we stand on that one, folks. Talking of Nigel, we can talk about him a little bit more in the second half. So come and join us after a very short break. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to The Two Mats. And if you like the kind of conversations we have here, there are loads more to be had in print and online at the New European. And I have got a very special offer for all listeners of The Two Mats. We are giving away copies of Alistair Campbell's Diaries 2023, which is a book we're publishing this month. It's a fantastic diary full of everything that's happened, all the people he's met, and anybody who's a fan of Alistair Campbell's diaries over the years know how brilliantly he turns them out. He is very much a latter-day Samuel Pepys.
He really is.
He is. So you can get a free copy of Alistair Campbell's Diaries 2023 worth £20 when you subscribe to the New European from as little as £1 a week. Or if you like getting the newspaper delivered to your door every single week, you can have that for just another £1 a week. And that's a 75% saving on the price you'll pay at the newsagents. To get this great offer, go to www.theneweuropean.co.uk/2mats. That's the number 2, MATTS. Tell them I sent you, and you'll get your free copy of Alistair Campbell's Diary 2023 delivered to you in time for Christmas. Welcome back. Talking of populist wankers.
Well, the things you say about me.
Nigel Farage.
I'm not a populist. Nigel Farage. Well, you sent me a clip, and actually, can we get a little bit of it from?
Snapshot of it.
Yeah.
It was quite the most odd thing.
I don't want to spoil the sort of glow that I have after doing I'm a Celebrity, and I've got no criticisms at all of the production team or anybody involved in that programme. But I would say to you, Mr. Kevin Lygo, the boss of ITV, it's up to you, mate. If you want to go to war with me, you really can. The last person that did that was called Dame Alison Rose from That West Bank, and look what happened to her. So I would suggest, Mr. Lygo, that I am prepared to ignore your rude, one-handed gestures, the pathetic attempts by some of your staff to stitch me up. I'm prepared to forget all of it if we can call a truce. But if you really, really want to go to war with me, I don't think it'll do ITV's share price an awful lot of good. So let's please end the nonsense, and let's do it now.
So I hadn't seen it, but thank you for sending it to me. It was Farage recently returned from the jungle where he won bronze medal position. I think he'd rather hope to be on the podium with gold. But anyway, calling out Kevin Lygo.
Declaring war on Kevin Lygo.
Yeah, if you think, come and get it.
The boss of ITV. So the background to this is, which I think is Kevin Lygo. I've never met him, but obviously he's been on the scene for so long. I haven't really had an opinion on him up until now, but I now think he's an absolute copper-bottom legend.
National hero.
At some kind of conference or something.
The ITV Palooza event,
whatever that is.
Yeah.
Kevin Lygo's stood there, and there's a signer for the deaf stood by the podium, and Kevin Lygo says, "I'm so glad you're here. I don't know any sign language at all." Actually, that's not true. I only know the sign language for Nigel Farage.
And did a wanker
and then does a wanker signal. Right.
And he took this very badly, Farage. And I think Lygo also said, "Don't worry, Farage knows he has to come back home from Australia in a dinghy." So this is all good material, all good stuff.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about Farage, I mean, this is where it gets sort of like a bad Guy Ritchie movie, isn't it? I mean, we had the 5 families in part 1 from the kind of Godfather reference, and this is like, come and get it if you think you're hard enough. And this very open threat, like, look what I did to Alison Rose at NatWest over the debanking so-called
These
scandal.
These are the people who rail against cancel culture.
Absolutely incredible.
I'm being shut down. He's saying to Kevin Lygo, "Don't call me a wanker, or I'll decimate the share price of ITV."
I mean, they are. As my youngest son never fails to point out, and he's quite right. They are the biggest snowflakes.
Oh,
the populist right. And he obviously came back and found out this had happened and went postal. And the whole idea, I'm prepared forget it all if you call a truce. I mean, this is the language of someone who is now being hailed, let us not forget, as the potential saviour of the Tory party. You know, this ludicrous idea that there's going to be a dream ticket. I mean, dream ticket is not how I would describe it, but of Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. Wow. Although it's interesting to speculate, which of them would be. Can you imagine one of them giving way to the other? I mean, it's not going to happen. Yeah. I do think, as we've discussed this often, and I think it's a clear and present danger. I think Farage probably will join the Conservative Party at some point, and then we are into very interesting and dangerous territory. But as awful as he is, one has to acknowledge he's a very modern politician. Yeah. He's a shapeshifter. He's able to move from one context to another. So, he was UKIP, then he was Brexit Party, then he launches a campaign against net zero, which turns out to be very influential, and is a factor in Rishi Sunak's rowback from the net zero targets. Then he goes on, I'm a Celebrity, in the jungle. I think we're agreed that he didn't quite make the impact he might have hoped for, but, he's back in the news.
Well, they lost 4 million viewers, I think.
They did. I mean, I think my own view is that the format has reached the end of the line. Yeah. But nonetheless, he got through to the final, which is disappointing for everyone who was hoping him to fall over. But
he didn't win, and which is interesting.
It would have been a disaster if he'd won. Yeah. And I think that it's good that he didn't win, but he's come out of it at a rate of knots with a new grievance. Yeah. He's extremely adept at finding a new enemy, a new grievance, a new cause. He exists in a kind of landscape of pop-up parties. So at the moment, Reform UK, I think, he's president of it. Richard Tice is leader.
Richard Tice, yeah.
But you can see him thinking maybe I should be the front man for that in the coming election.
I didn't see it, but I saw that Richard Tice interviewed him on Talk TV. The two of them, as though there's any remote semblance of objectivity or.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, it is interesting how Talk TV and GB News are not yet remotely in the Fox News sort of zone in terms of influence, but we can't forget about them because they are providing a sort of unmonitored, apparently I know Ofcom has received lots of complaints from them, but more or less unregulated space for politicians to straddle the news entertainment sector and the politics sector.
It's very interesting because I noticed Piers Morgan, who gets loads and loads of headlines, I mean, doesn't he? And does
well, he's had a very good war, as they say, because to be fair to him, he's had people from both sides on,
and he's always
consistently.
Has good wars,
he's like, a very it's become a very good show if you want to know where the different arguments are going on the war.
So he had an NHS doctor who is the UK leader of
Hizbut Tahrir.
Yeah, thank you for pronouncing that for me properly. And they had this very vitriolic row, and that spilled over into X/Twitter. And what I noticed is that Piers started complaining about the very format where he's succeeding, which is short form clips. And he's saying, no, you've got to, if you want to see what I said properly, you've got to look at the whole show. And it did occur to me, this is the challenge for Piers and GB News and all of these kind of people who are now relying on short clips, is that they are devoid of context and consideration. And it plays into a format where brevity is rewarded rather than thought. Yes. And so, it does, again, if we're thinking about the media and the national discourse, this is not a good thing that we are now thriving on short clips of things.
A good example of that is, so the pro-Israel side has generated a huge number of WhatsApp groups that proliferate, again, short clips. And then the pro-Palestinian side has been incredibly strong on TikTok. And so you've had, kids in the West quoting Osama bin Laden's letter to America with praise. And there's something worrying about both in a way, which is the complexity and nuance of a conflict like this and the huge stakes and loss of life do not map onto that kind of coverage
onto TikTok. Yeah.
You need. I mean, like as we were saying just before we went on, last week we had Jason Pack, a great expert on the Middle East, and I think we both agreed that his nuanced, very personal and unique take on the war was enlightening.
No, totally.
But you had to listen to the whole thing to get it.
That's right. You couldn't just say, you couldn't present as many do, a headline.
No,
and say here
I would struggle
to
put a headline on that, and all the better for it actually.
Yes, that's right. And unfortunately, social media is full of people who are rewarded. Thinking about Owen Jones, for instance, who is rewarded by having a completely polar view on something that he sticks to doggedly and calls everybody with any nuance either side of that thing an idiot or a traitor or
criminal.
To take
an example on the left and then one on the right. So Owen Jones did a much talked about video analysing the now famous horrific 43-minute tape of the Hamas atrocities.
Yeah.
And he did what revisionists always do, which is to say, I'm just asking questions. Just asking questions. Yeah. Israel went berserk. It went viral. It was obviously meant to go viral. Yeah. So whatever you think about what he said, it achieved his ambition, which was to shore up his reach and his prominence. Another example, which is definitely worth keeping an eye on, is that Alex Jones of InfoWars fame, the man who's engaged still in huge litigation for the lies he told about the Sandy Hook massacre, and a really bottom of the barrel conspiracy theorist merchant, is back on X, Twitter.
After a poll by Elon Musk on Twitter.
Exactly. And the first thing he does is do an hour-long interview on X with Tucker Carlson, and again, that's not a hugely nuanced or diverse viewpoint kind of exchange. But I think it's a complicated question about social media and who's allowed on and who's not. But what I do know is that, to your point, Matt, the whole public discourse is now distorted by the impact of the polls, the polarities in this. Yeah. And there is no silver bullet solution to this.
No.
But it is getting worse, I think. Yeah. Polarization is getting worse.
And also, just saying this is my position and my position is the right side of history, literally saying that.
Yes.
My position is the right side of history and you are on the wrong side of history and you will be treated as a pariah by future generations, which is what these people do. Yes. It's just insane. No one knows where the side of history is going to fall. That's the point of history.
Something that is a new concept to me, but I heard the other day, is that purity compacts, as they're called apparently, are very unstable bases for any relationship between a content producer and an audience. In other words, sooner or later, you get found out.
So, expand that a bit.
A purity compact is where, let's say on this podcast, we never ever asked questions or tested our assumptions or our priors, as they're called in America. A purity compact would be that we only provide the listeners of the two Matts with a completely predictable set of answers to everything, and that's a purity compact.
So we've got a manifesto and we'll stick to it,
and we don't care
of any other
facts,
opinion,
developments, new arguments. Yeah. We're not open to that. Right. Now, of course, everyone has a viewpoint. There's nothing wrong with that, but a purity compact is what is the real problem with a lot of speech and discourse and writing and podcast content in the West and elsewhere now, which is, come to this and I will just tell you that everything you think is right and remind you that I'm always right.
Yes.
And in the end, that does not get you. It certainly doesn't help democracy, and we can take that for granted. But also, I think it has a half-life. You cannot really deal with the real world in that. So, if you're a consumer that just wants to remain infantilized, then I guess you will stick with it.
Yeah.
But it's in a world where people are finding themselves really hitting on the nose by reality, not least because of the cost of living crisis and a world of great instability. I'm not sure that just doing that has a future. There's no question the polarization genie is out the bottle now.
Yeah.
It's not going to go away overnight.
Yeah, and the trouble is that you end up talking about, again, as we're doing now, you talk about the personalities. And I noted Gary Lineker, who I think's terrific,
Yeah.
and I think his tweets are bang on and more power to his elbow. I wish he'd tweet more. But what the incoming chairman of the BBC said at the select committee was, well, it's not helpful. And I did actually have some sympathy with this argument. It's not helpful to his argument because all you end up talking about is Gary Lineker's tweets.
Yes.
Because it's so predictable that the Daily Mail will say, shut up, Lineker, and meanwhile have a picture underneath that of Nigel Farage as though he'd won in the jungle, not come third. But there's their culture war, and it's all about people. It's not about the stuff, it's about people.
That's one of the big changes, I think, in political culture in the last 20 years, and indeed culture generally, is that it's people, not institutions or parties or causes, that attract loyalty and trust and devotion. Yeah. And so another way of putting it is Cristiano Ronaldo has twice as many followers on social media than Real Madrid.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I mean, that just gives you a sort of for instance of it.
Yeah.
And, Gary Lineker is as influential in his own way, maybe more so than if the BBC makes a statement.
Yeah.
He's crossed generations. That's a key thing about him.
The question is that if Gary Lineker, for instance, knows if he tweets something that it's going to be on the front page of the Daily Mail tomorrow and it'll all be an attack on him, would he, this is a question, I don't know the answer and it's up to him at the end of the day, but would he be better not tweeting so that the issue had more prominence rather than this knee-jerk assault on him as a personality?
I think that's the correct analysis. I think the problem is that he, I suspect, thinks, and I think he's not wrong, we live in emergency times.
Yeah.
And I think he does feel, I think this is very much to his credit, he feels that he has a platform, he has a status that straddles the sporting media and political world, and that he therefore has some sort of responsibility to speak out. Now, clearly, that rubs up against his role as a face of the BBC. I mean, they haven't resolved it yet. They haven't. But I don't think he's going to roll over.
I agree with it, and I hope he doesn't roll over. But I do also think, and this is what's called holding two contradictory thoughts in your head at the same time, folks.
The nature of life.
I also think it makes it easier for the bad guys to distract from the real problem.
That's absolutely true. The counter argument to that is, how do you get progressive ideas, for want of a better word, across, except through the vector of personality?
Yeah.
Because, if the Labour Party issues a press release saying this bill is rubbish, it will reach a fraction of the people, of the number of people that a Gary Lineker tweet will have.
That's true.
I don't have a pat answer to this.
No, that's because a pat answer doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
So
and,
there we go.
We don't do pat answers on the two mats.
And on that bombshell, didn't we have time to talk about?
Well, I think again, you alerted me this morning, we're recording this on Thursday, to the exciting news about Mr. Scott Benton.
Oh, yeah.
The MP for Blackpool South.
Incredible.
Independent, because he had the Tory whip taken away from him, and now
suspended for 35 days.
Yes, I think the Commons has to ratify it, but the Standards Committee is. He's gone out, basically said this is to undercover journalists, I think from the Times, saying, and he told them how to do a grift. Inviting people to hospitality, and the Standards Committee is extremely unimpressed and has recommended, I think, 35 days.
Which will trigger another by-election.
Yes, because once you're over 10 days, then you're vulnerable to a petition for recall, and you only have to get 10% majority. And his I looked up this morning, his majority in Blackpool South is only 3,690. So if there is a by-election, that's a Labour win. Straightforwardly. And they're still waiting for the petition to close on Peter Bone, the Tory MP for Wellingborough. So, Rishi, to end his year of triumph with even two more, wins, could be looking in the new year to a couple of nasty by-elections.
Fantastic news.
Isn't he great? I
loved, my favourite bit of the week was Michelle Mone and her husband Doug Barrowman with their 70-minute quote-unquote documentary that they'd entirely paid for, but apparently hadn't told any of the people, or some of the people hadn't told them that it was being funded by PPE MedPro. So there's now people on Twitter saying,
Hang on a minute.
When I spoke to them, they made no indication that they were involved with it, and I'm appalled that I'm part of this charade. And listening to Doug Barrowman, valued, I don't know, several hundreds of millions in his Isle of Man home, talking about how the New European had deeply hurt them by saying our front page with the headline "Stop This Boat" with a picture of Michelle on the Lady M yacht, which she then threatened to sue us over for defamation. And we, as we did tweet, and shield your ears, listeners of A Gentle Position, told her to fuck off.
Yes.
And
off she fucked, really.
Off she fucked. But she has got bigger fish to fry, because she was apparently interviewed under caution by the police or the fraud office in regards to this deal where they profited to the tune of £69 million for PPE equipment, some of which was used, some of which wasn't used. They're arguing why it wasn't used as a technicality. But she tweets this week saying, it's been a terrible time for me. I've been ruined by this. People think I'm a liar and a cheat. It's like, again, somebody who has totally lost touch with reality.
Yeah,
and
completely.
That there's any sympathy for somebody who's made £69 million quid.
None at all.
During the COVID pandemic. Do me a favour.
I think that actually, although seeing Sunak and Johnson at the COVID inquiry has been sort of gripping it after a fashion, it'll be in that sort of thing that the real scandals emerge.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, this is really important stuff. Yeah. And you'd have to have a heart of stone not to laugh at their predicament, wouldn't you?
Well, totally. And the trouble with telling people that you're going to sue them for defamation is that if those people don't collapse into a bundle of nerves and roll over for you, your next step is you either shut up and go away and look foolish, or you do sue them, and then it goes in front of a court and you're entitled to ask for evidence, and then a jury decides.
I think discovery in that particular case would be very interesting.
Very interesting. So bring that one on.
Bring it on.
Thank you very much, folks. I hope you enjoyed listening. Get your questions in and any feedback to the 2 Matts, that's the number 2, MATTS, at tnepublishing.com. That's 2Matts at tnepublishing.com. Or if you listen on Spotify, you can message us there, and that's exactly what Goldsack did. Goldsack? Is that a real name? Is that a boast? That's what Goldsack...
Goldsack. It's a Bond villain.
Goldsack said, after hearing The Coming Storm on BBC4, it seems impossible to discuss facts with conspiracy theorists. How can someone bring them back to reality, to the real world? Well, maybe we'll have a tackle at answering that on our Q&A question session on Sunday. We're back with a new episode on Sunday. And don't forget our Christmas deal. Head to theneweuropean.co.uk/2Matts and you can get your free Alistair Campbell Diaries 2023 with a subscription to the New European from just £1 a week.
Lucky people.
Yes, indeed. Don't you think
people.
I mean, that's
a good
mad
offer.
Generosity, isn't it?
Crazy generosity.
Anyway, grab it while it's there. They're going like hotcakes. There's a link in the show notes. Thanks as ever to our producer Ollie Pert at Rethink Audio, assisted by Matt Hill. And until next week,
it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.